Hello everyone, welcome to episode 53 of our Basketball QnA. Pro, you all good to go?
Bogues, I'm good. Are you?
Very good, very good. Lot to talk about.
Perfect.
Anyone got a question, feel free to jump in the queue and fire away. All right, first one. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, g'day guys. Certainly glad the Ben Simmons drama's over. I'm sure you guys probably are as well. I've got a couple of questions for you this week. So probably my first one is, how do you feel, both of you feel about players signing, long-term deals for a max contract, for example, but then not seeing it through? So, let's say they sign a 4 or 5 year deal, but then sort of 2 years in, they sort of say, nah, I'm sort of done with this, I'm out of here. Do you sort of sympathise with the player a bit when they, you kind of think, okay, well, they were promised to be bringing in players to bring them a championship, or the direction we told them they were going? Or do you sort of more think around the way, well, sorry, you signed a 5 year deal, deal with it? That's my first question. And second question is, do you think in today's game, triple doubles, getting a triple double, has the same significance? Or do you think, because it seems to be a lot easier in today's game for a player to get a triple double, or do you think it really depends on the player? I suppose someone like, Westbrook, for example, if he doesn't get a triple double, it's kind of a, it's almost more common for him to get a triple double than not. But then there's other players where it seems quite a big thing. I'd just be interested to know both your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no worries. But let's just keep it to one question, and then if you want to ask that second one, just join the queue again, just out of respect to everyone else that joins.
Yeah, of course.
So
definitely.
We'll do the long-term deal one and get rolling on that. So yeah, thanks for your question, Chris. So look, it's tough, man. I think I'm in the pact of, at least if you've signed a long-term contract, you should at least see out the first couple of years, which was generally the unwritten rule pro back in the day. It was like you'd give it probably 3 out of the 5 before you started getting antsy about wanting to be moved if things weren't going well. But what we're seeing today is, like you said, the Ben Simmons one is a prime example of, you've signed a 5 year deal and within the first year you want out. That's real dangerous territory. We've spoken about it at length on the pod. I think what we're going to see, this is going to come up in the next CBA. There will be no doubt in my mind, and I've got on the run sheet for when we do our pod here in about 30 minutes, is that the owners and the front office and the NBA execs, this is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for the game. And look, there are circumstances where, franchises and players go separate ways, and it's respectable and whatnot. But first year, I'm not for that. You look at the James Harden side of things, where I think the way James has structured his contracts to an extent, and his agent, should be commended, because he's used the loopholes of being able to do those 2 year deals. He has all the leverage every single time he's still under contract, because for those that aren't familiar, all he said was, I want to get traded. I only want to go to Philly. And his deal expires at the end of this season. So if someone else comes in, a la, Toronto Raptors did with Kawhi, they took that risk, but they've only got, they had at least had Kawhi for the whole season. Someone trading for James now would have him for 30, 40 more games. And then he's on record as saying, I'm going to Philly. I'm going to sign there. I'm not signing with you in free agency. So then it hinders where he can be traded, but all the power then is still with the player. And you want players to have power to an extent, but if you're signing contracts, you want some teams to at least receive some compensation. So I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it's going to change. I think it has to. There's got to be something that comes in, because otherwise you're at risk of the contracts aren't worth the paper they're written on. If you can sign a 5 year deal and get out of it within a year, don't even have 5 year deals. Just have year to year deals for everyone in the league. Essentially, that's what you're doing now. I know that's being a bit extreme, and it's probably not going to be feasible for your middle class and your mid tier players and your low tier players. But for your max guys, that's essentially what's happening right now. Is most of those guys are holding teams to ransom. And I thought the Simmons one was going to be a line in the sand moment, where they were going to say, you know what, like, we're going to let you sit. And I wasn't, not like I was cheering for it, but I honestly, if I'm being honest, I thought it wouldn't have been the worst thing for the game, because then it sets a precedent. Dude, you've signed a 5-year deal, figure it out. And fortunately, the cooler heads prevailed. They both got on with life. They've made the trade now, and obviously on the other side of that, you don't want Joel Embiid to not be able to compete for a championship with another superstar playing next to him. So there's a lot of different things, Pro, but I think back when I, first came in the league, a lot of guys that signed 5-year deals, they'd sign them knowing the franchise wasn't in great shape, but they'd at least give it the first 3 or 4 years before they started rattling their tins to get out, Pro. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on it.
I mean, obviously, you would want everybody to sort of honor what they have, like the team honor the contract as far as trying to put as many pieces together around the player, and then the player playing out the contract the best of their ability. Rick Carlisle taught me something when I was working for him. He said something that was really smart. He said, look, it's all about, I think I was going through my own negotiation and contract, and he goes, Mike, it's all about leverage. And I think that's really true. Like, whoever has the leverage in each situation is going to prevail. Philly had all the leverage in the Simmons deal, all the leverage, because they're still winning decently. They needed to make a deal, but they could have afforded just to sit on it. Plus, you had a GM that was gonna like die on his sword as far as getting a James Harden deal done. So he was, like I said last week, he wasn't going to trade for anybody. So like, in this situation, they had the leverage. But most situations, like James Harden and LeBron and most of his situations, they've got all the leverage. When they sign the deal, they could just sit. And I think the leverage is more not about sitting, but trading. Like this, and I'll talk about it in the pod, like that's the biggest problem, is these players now, the sort of blueprint is, if you're a superstar, top 10, top 12 player, put it through your agency like James Harden did, is like, look, if you trade for me, I'm not going to really, you're not going to get my best effort. I'm not going to re-sign with you. And quote unquote, I'll probably play 30 games a year for you until you make a trade and you get me out of town. So it limits what you can do. So this trade was sort of forced, and he had all the leverage. So I think in each situation, it depends on who has the leverage. I don't like it, but there's really nothing, Bogues, you can do. There's nothing you can do. Yeah, you could say, okay, if the guy demands the trade, that you could fine him big time money and all this stuff. But like, how are you really going to track it? Like, who's to blame? Who are you going to fine? It's not always the player. Sometimes,
and that's exactly it, Pro. You hit on the head. That's what I was going to say. I mean, it's not always. Sometimes teams, new coach comes in and they've signed a guy to a max deal 2 years before, and then the franchise is going in a rebuild, a la OKC, San Antonio are doing right now, and they've got a max slot, and they're like, we're not going to play you, John Wall, right? So it does go both ways, but I agree with you to an extent, but I think the 1 year, like asking for a trade after signing an extension or a long-term deal within the first year or two, I think is not right. And I think, maybe they do a percentage where they say, all right, you want out this early, before year 3, you eat 10% of your contract goes back to the team that you signed it with. Or I don't know. There's some, I can guarantee you, and I just saw Mark Stein on his Substack wrote about it, that the league's not happy about it, the executives aren't happy about it, and the owners aren't happy about it. So when those three pools of people aren't unhappy, when the CBA comes up, there's going to be something they put in. But yeah, to an extent, I'm probably on par with you. It's like, what else are you going to do, really, right?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what they come up with. I'm sure they'll come up with something, but yeah, it's a tough thing, and it's a black eye on the league, to be honest with you, because it's getting to be a joke. These things are getting to be a joke. It really started with like Carmelo Anthony and Deron Williams back in like 06 when they forced their way out of town. It started there, like when this whole drama of not re-signing a year in advance and then trades and forcing out of town, like it started there, and then LeBron, Carmelo, LeBron and all these other guys forced their way out of town on teams, but. It's really a black mark to the league, and they got to really start to try to deal with it the best they can, because I think people are getting a little bit fed up with it.
Yeah, it's just hard to support. We know the leagues, and pro sports have gone more towards supporting player X or player Y, and a lot of people follow LeBron wherever he goes, or KD or Steph or whatever it is. Steph hasn't left yet, but you get my point. But it's hard to be an all-in supporter of a team when things like this happen. Like, you are OKC or you are Denver. You draft a stud. Your front office gets it right. You get Carmelo, you get KD, you get whoever, right? And then it's just like you just know it's a matter of time. Like, I'm buying my kid this jersey, but this guy's probably going to be gone in 3 or 4 years to a bigger market, or Donovan Mitchell to a more star-studded market, and that kind of sucks a little bit, right? Because there's always that little bit of sour taste in your mouth when you're thinking about it, and I think that's what needs to change, right? It just needs to be, I think it's a balance. You still want to support stars, but also, you want people to be able to support their team and know that a guy's going to be there long term, and we just don't see that enough in the NBA now, and it's really leveraged. And I'm a former player saying this, right? It's leveraged way too far in the player's favor. I think there needs to be a balance for you to continue to have a feasible business and a great product. You can't just have players continuously get what they want. There has to be a little bit of pushback. And when's the last time we've heard, maybe John Wall right now, when's the last time we've heard, a high percentage of teams push back on a trade request or a demand or a player that wasn't unhappy and win? You ever rarely hear it these days, bro. Like it always ends up the player gets what they want or close to what they want, right?
Yeah, and they do. And I think with John Wall, I think it was a sort of a situation where they had all these young guys and they weren't going to play him anyway. And his contracts, I don't think any real contract is untradeable. I think the league has proven that the last 3 or 4 years. Like almost every deal got traded that we said it could never be traded. But you very rarely see the team have all the juice in sort of negotiating with the player as far as sitting them when the players quote unquote wants out of a situation. It's an interesting phenomenon, actually.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch or see what they're going to do with the next CBA. So watch that with interest and see what direction they go. But anyone else got a question? Feel free to join the queue. Steve, fire away, man.
Hey, fellas. Thanks for taking my call.
No worries.
Andrew, I'm a big fan from your days with the Warriors. And I'm wondering, with the Warriors coming off 2 back-to-back losses against teams that had pretty good big men, and with Draymond still, not coming back anytime in the foreseeable future, do you think, were you surprised the Warriors didn't go for a big man before the trading deadline? And do you think that they have enough to make a serious deep run in the finals this year?
Yeah, thanks for your question. That's a great question, because we know that bigs aren't a integral big minute part of what Steve Kerr does, but you do need someone in there 20, 25 minutes just for some rim protection, just physicality. If you happen to run into Jokic or the finals with Embiid or even Giannis to an extent, you want some bigger bodies at the rim. So I think it's a valid point. I think they thought, I think Wiseman's now pro. What's the latest on Wiseman? Is he done for the year? Is that what I read?
It's not great. It's not looking great for him, but I haven't heard
it's close.
that he's got. Yeah, it's close to the year.
So I think they were banking on Wiseman being back as to why they didn't make a move. But I would really keep your eye on the buyout market. I think that will be an opportunity. I know we flagged, I think, who did we say? DeAndre Jordan maybe would be a decent fit for him. I mean, he can run. He's athletic. He's a good lob guy. I mean, Draymond loves playing with lob guys at the 5 spot, so he could be a candidate if he gets bought out. So I'd look towards the buyout market. I think you're right. They do need another body. Bielitsa's not that big physical 5 that they need. But for the most part, the Warriors will play and make you match to them. So I think that's what probably they're banking on. But yeah, you run into a legit 7-footer that can score and do everything like Jokic or Embiid, then they might have a bit of trouble with that. So I think they will find someone around that deadline. And look, they're first, second in the West right now with Phoenix. So I think there'll be a lot of candidates that would love to go there, love to go and play with Steph, potentially compete for a championship. And I don't think Phoenix is a competitor for any bigs really, because they've got a decent mix of bigs there already. So with JaVale and DeAndre, so I doubt they'd go to the buyout market competing with Golden State, unless it becomes one of those we're going to sign him just so you can't type deals, which we do see sometimes with teams that will potentially end up in the conference finals against each other. So I think it's a valid point. They need something there. It's not going to be a guy that comes in and plays 25, 30. I think it's a 10 or 15 minute spot. Maybe you run into someone in the playoffs where you need to play that big, probably a little bit more for some physicality. But I assume their front office is aware of it, and they're probably. If I was a gambling man, I'd say they're already circling a couple of names that agents have already said we're trying to get this guy bought out, and they've probably got some guys ready to go. If I was to gamble, so we'll watch that space, Pro. I don't know what your thoughts are on it.
I don't think they had any chips to play for a major trade for a big guy or even a mid-level big guy. I think like you said, I think they're just going to wait. I don't think they do a lot with bigs anyway, and I think they're just going to wait on it and see if there's a DeAndre Jordan, at the trade, at the buyout market. So we'll see.
Agree. All right, we'll go to our next one, Charlie.
Yeah, hey guys. I was just wanting to ask you two a question. Who's some players that you've played with have got like a bad rap from, say, the media, teammates, or fans, or whatever, and you played with them and they were looking like a bit of a hard head, around? Who's people like that?
So the question was around some guys that have a bad rap that aren't all that. I've played with many. Look, one guy that as a day to day, like DeMarcus Cousins was a guy I played with at Golden State, and look, he can be demonstrative at times, and he's passionate and fiery, but like in the day to day locker room, I thought he'd be tough to deal with, just because we got into it a lot when we played, all that kind of stuff. But he was actually great sense of humor, fun to be around. The guys loved him, but he was just one of those guys that got white line fever and would just do some crazy stuff when he was on the court or in the practice gym. So that was one guy for me. Who else do we have? I mean, look, Draymond gets a bit of a hard knock sometimes, just because he's so passionate and fiery, and he was one of the best teammates I've had as far as, leaving it all out there for you and always having your back. So he'd be another one that sometimes by the media gets a bad rap. KD has he goes back and forth with people on social media and whatnot, so he gets a little bit of a bad rap for that because people don't like that for whatever reason. They don't like you defending yourself when people are giving you shit. But he was pretty quiet for the most part and soft-spoken. So there's three guys that behind the scenes that I thought I'd have a different experience with, if that makes sense. But I mean, there's countless examples, Pro. You would have had truckloads coming through Dallas, especially as much as a revolving door it was when you were there.
Yeah, I would say JaVale McGee, probably the biggest one. JaVale McGee and Rondo, of course, but, Rondo sort of had some instances where, people won't really fail for him too much. But JaVale McGee, I would say definitely a guy that wasn't a problem at all. A little spacey, a little different. I like him. But whatever you told him to do, he did on a daily basis. Like you be here at 8:30, he'll be there at 8:30. He'll work on whatever you ask to do. Now in games, he can get a little out of control when he tries to make plays on his own. And I would say another one is Nerlens Noel. Same thing. I think Nerlens is the type of guy that, like, if you don't tell him anything and he just does it on his own, he probably won't work as hard or be as diligent. But if you tell him exactly what you expect out of him, he did exactly what we all asked with him in Dallas. So I would say those two guys for sure. And they got really bad raps, especially JaVale. I think JaVale's a great guy to deal with. I think a lot of people are, how that is, Bogues. A lot of coaches, when they get a guy that has a bad rap, sometimes they treat him differently and they don't really give him a benefit of the doubt. And then it ends up being a bad match. But I think if you just sort of treat everybody into, let them, have their back until they give you a reason not to, I think that's probably the best advice I would give to anybody acquiring a player like that, And
JaVale's a prime example. Like he's body, athleticism, length, that's a huge asset. And it just felt like in Washington, he wasn't around the best teammates, let's be honest, the best veterans at times through that whole organization when he was a young fella, which can have a bad effect on how you think the NBA is and what you think the norm is. I think sometimes for guys like that, it's like you said, it's a matter of a coach pulling him aside and saying, hey, I know you want to get in your bag and thrill the crowd every now and then and you love, but I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And then as a coach, you got to be like, hey, like in your own head, I'll give him one of those stupid plays a game. Like I might say, if you're doing all these other things for me, hey, like I might call a play for you where you can ISO from the top of the key and try to put it behind your back and like shoot a running hook if maybe once a game, right? But then if it becomes more than that, you have a chat to him. But I think that communication's gone too from some coaches. And I think he came into a system where Gilbert was there. They were kind of coming out of that, potentially a conference finals team against Cleveland to where are we going, starting to have aging veterans in Brendan Haywood and Gilbert and Antoine Jameson and Deshaun Stevenson. They had a bunch of guys, and it was like they were in the transition, and then it all started to fall apart. And JaVale found minutes in a system that really didn't have too much discipline, and it kind of hurt him a little bit because he did some crazy things. But I think you're totally right. I think no one really invested time in him as a young fella back then. I mean, but that level of athleticism and body and length, that's an asset for most teams if coached properly. And I think sometimes we scapegoat the athlete, like JaVale, but I think some of that blame is on his coaches in his first couple of years, because he's a very good rim protector. He can run the floor, the best of them. And in his prime, he was tough. But like you said, in his prime, he would do one or two stupid things, get benched, and then it'd set him back 3 or 4 games until he found his confidence again. So I totally agree. I think JaVale's a really good example, and Nerlens Noel, turning down that contract still, he's got to be waking up in a cold sweat.
That stings for sure. That definitely stings. But yeah, I agree. The JaVale thing too, Bogues, I don't think he was ready to listen when he was in Washington either. I think like coming in as a high draft pick, one of the top players coming out of his draft, yeah, he was a little spacey as it is. Probably had everybody around him telling him he was going to be the next, the next like Tim Duncan or whatever. And I don't think he was ready to listen. I think the best thing sometimes for a player to do is fail. And to fail out of a situation, get traded a couple of times, and then be in a situation where they don't need to play you. I think that's what he got in Dallas a little bit. And then when he went to, when he went to the Lakers or Golden State and places like that, and now Phoenix, well, he built back his reputation, his credit rating, as I like to say, and now he's fine. But I think it takes sometimes failing and the league telling you, look, we don't need you to move on. We're good. But if you don't do what we say, like sort of what DeMarcus Cousins is dealing with now, that's good for a player sometimes, where you get knocked down a couple of pegs, and then now you got to work for your spot and you got to earn it, and you have to have sort of a different approach and different attitude the way you look at it. So that's just sort of how I see it.
And I think, like I said, I think the veterans on that team, you might be right, where JaVale came into a system thinking he was the man. That's where you need good veterans like, hey, young fella, no, you were a top 10 pick or whatever, but we've got proven veterans and stars on this team. We need you. Block us 3 shots, get us 10 rebounds. We'll give you a couple of little bunnies you can dunk, but don't focus on trying to get in your bag right now. You'll get to that. You're in year 1. That's where you need good veterans to instill that every day. Hey, keep coming to work, keep work on your skills, but right now we don't need you to do that. And that's the hardest thing to hear sometimes, especially if you're a top 10 pick going to a playoff team can actually hinder you. Where I always argue a top 10 pick going to a shitty team is probably better for them individually, because they're going to play through their mistakes, a la Josh Giddey, a la these guys that are playing no matter what. Whereas, arguably we had this conversation, Josh Giddey's with the Warriors right now. How many minutes is he playing? And this is no shot at Josh Giddey. I'm just saying you're playing behind Steph. Clay's back from injury now, and Wiggins is having an all-star year. Like, do the math. So if he goes to that system, all of a sudden the ball's not in his hands as much. All of a sudden he's probably off the ball a little bit with Steph handling. They throw it to him and he has to knock down that wide open 3. Things change. Pressure changes. He's not in a feel. He's not in a rhythm. Whereas OKC, hey, young fella, like, you're 0 for 5. We don't care. Shoot the 6 one. Get in the paint, attack. So all these things, you can be a victim of circumstance in the NBA and in pro sports in general. And I think JaVale McGee was definitely a prime example of that. And I think, he was definitely a part of the blame as well. So next one, we'll move on to Dan.
Yeah, Lauren Jackson making a comeback. What's your thoughts, folks?
I think it's interesting. What is she, 40, 41?
Yeah, she's 40, going on 41.
Well, I'm 37 and I can, I've some days I struggle to, get out of bed. I'm all right. But I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be tough. She's had an injury history also, so it wasn't like she was the most healthiest when she went into retirement. Had a baby as well, which can, put a bit of a strain on the body. Yeah, I think it's a great story, and it's one of our best female basketballers that have ever, it is our best female basketball in Australian history and potentially one of the best in the world ever. But man, 40-41, that's tough. You're going to have, I think it's a case of your brain. Like even for me, there's days I wake up, go to the park with my kids or whatever, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could squeeze out another year or two. It's your mind telling you you're good, but it's like 5 days into that training camp or 5 days into that road, a road trip with 2 games and no sleep and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, why did I do this? And I know that's where your mind can really play tricks on you. So I support her and hope she kills it. But yeah, it's going to be tough.
She's been using medicinal marijuana as pain relief legally.
Yeah, which a lot of athletes are doing.
It's an interesting thought of it.
Yeah, a lot of athletes are doing it. You can do it with oils as well, and there's creams and there's all kinds of different things. I tried a bit of the oil for rubbing on my leg when I broke my leg, and I can say that now because I was uncontracted and I technically wasn't in the protocol to be drug tested. So even if it absorbed in my skin and I was positive, unlucky they didn't catch me. But yeah, I mean, you can do that, but one thing marijuana is not going to do is make you younger. So, she's up there in age.
Yeah, just another question. For Pro, in Victoria, they've thrown in the rep ball no zone. You're not allowed to play zone defense anymore in rep junior basketball in Victoria. Is that a thing that's in America or not? Not a common thing.
So Pro rep is juniors. So it's basically, I think is it 14, 16s under? Is it
12?
All?
It's from 12 under 12s upwards in rep ball, but in club ball, zones allowed.
Here's my thought. In the United States, there is no zone law in most leagues, meaning you could play it 4 quarters, and in most of these coaches that are some of the laziest people I've ever seen would play it 7 quarters if they could, just because they don't want to teach it. I think it should be outlawed. I think it should be outlawed. If I was running a developmental league, I would allow it 1 quarter a game. All right, I would allow it. If you want to play it, you could play it for 1 quarter. But I think that kids need to learn how to play against man-to-man. And I think that because it's mostly played. Now, in college and the NBA, you see some zone, no doubt about it. I think in high school, I do think that, and the juniors, the younger, I think you should be playing mostly man-to-man. I think it's too lazy. I think you just sit back in a 2-3 or whatever, and it's just like not active. It's just not. I don't think it's good for the game. I can't speak on the game. I'm not the president of everything, but I just think that it's bad for the game when all you see is these zones. I just think it's a very lazy way to coach, and I think it's a very. I don't think it's teaching the kids anything. And then 90% of the schools, probably in high school, when these kids get up in the United States, play man-to-man on one level or another, and now they're behind the 8 ball. I think seeing both is good. I would allow it 1 quarter a game, but I'm not crazy about it. I would outlaw the fucking thing, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's tough. I think at the learning stages and I think it definitely shouldn't be allowed, and the developmental stages. But I think it's that tough conversation of then they get to the pros or college or the elite level that you're going to see zone. And if you've never played against it, we got taught it a lot, but that was the elite level, right? So elite level of juniors. So AIS, we did a lot of zone offense and stuff like that because we'd see it a lot in international ball, but it comes back to the conversation of this with at least in Australia. I don't know what it's like I know what it's like in high school, but I don't know what it's like in junior varsity or what the mindset is in junior high and even lower weekend ball for young kids in the US. But it's these junior coaches that value winning over development. They really shit me. It really pisses me off. And, you see this with numerous players. It's like you've got some guy coaching the under 14 first team in Club X or whatever it is, and he wins a championship for his under 14s and he's got this trophy and he's carrying it around like he's Phil Jackson. And you're like, look, it's you want to instill winning. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you want to instill winners and winning habits, but that coach will be much better well known if he developed an NBA player, period. People will know who he is for the rest of his life. People, are not going to give a shit that he has under 14s trophy from 1999. Like it's just, and it just gets me every single time because, you know, you've got kids that are, you know, let's say under 14s and you see this big tall kid that's long and just hasn't put it together, but you can see this kid's going to be 7 foot or he's got the athleticism, he just doesn't have the ball skills yet or whatever. And then you've got the kid that's fully grown at 12 years old, hairy legs, like Adam's apple, like, you know, bench pressing 200 pounds, and he's the man on their team because he's stronger, quicker, he's fully matured, right? And these coaches 9 times out of 10 will put that kid over the big kid and cut the other big kid because, oh, you're not ready yet. It's like, well, how about you make him ready? How about you put him in the team even as your 9, 10, 11, 12 guy, develop him. That guy goes to the NBA and your coach's name's Joe Blow. Everyone's going to talk about Joe Blow's development and he was great for this kid. But like I said, they're not going to care about your little trophy. And that's a big, big problem in Australia. It's starting to get a little bit better, but you still see it. All these clubs, all these associations, it's all political. It's this one coaches this one's son and that one knows this one. That's why he's the coach, or he won the championship and he's the best. We always win with this guy. It's like, well, my first question is, who have you developed? Who's your young guys? Give me some names. And that's what shits me with junior basketball. I think it really, I think development's winning's first and with development, right? And then number 3, it's you want to try and put together systems and whatever so you can compete and instill winning habits. But I think the development side of things, you know, because you see these kids that, like I said, that fully grown kid at 12 years old that's more mature, you fast forward 3 years, no one knows where he is. He's like working in a mine or working in a warehouse, you know, or he's got a full-time job or he's getting a PhD, nothing to do with sport. But that big kid might have quit the game because he got frustrated with the system. Like, oh, you know, no one wants to invest time in me, so I'll just quit. And then you like, you know, you see this 19-year-old that's 7'1", and you're like, hey man, like why didn't you take up basketball? Or oh, I did, but you know, I just had a rough go at it, so I just kind of gave it away. And you're just like, I hated hearing those stories just because you can't, unfortunately in basketball, you can't teach height, athleticism and length pro. So I don't know if it's similar in the US.
Yeah. Most of the coaches I see at the 14 and under level in the U.S. would probably coach the 92 Dream Team to a 500 record, you know, and they don't know how to teach. They don't. They know how to throw out all these tricky plays and these like junk zones and things like that. And they, like you said, they want to win. But like as far as teaching fundamentals, teaching defensive stance, teaching how to shoot the ball, teaching how to move without the ball, teaching, you know, the individual skills that these kids need and the team skills that these kids need, there's a really big lull in that in this country. And that's, you know, and that's the problem. Like, and that's why basketball IQ is at an all-time low. You know, not only, you know, some of the youth coaches, but also the trainers that work with youth. You know, I think the skill level of our game worldwide is at an all-time high. I think basketball IQ, at least in the United States, and competitiveness and knowing, you know, coachability and knowing how to deal with adversity is at an all-time low. And that's why it's a problem. But yeah, a lot of the coaches at the younger levels, they know all these tricky plays and this and that and how to stack their teams, but they don't know how to teach. And I think that's a huge problem. I think that really needs to be, you know, sort of dealt with at some point, you know, just for the betterment of the game.
Yeah, I think it's a balance. Like I said, you want to win, but you also want to make sure you're developing and you're churning. You know, the goal for clubs, at least in Australia, should be you get a kid at under 12s and you want to see him progress to each age level with more skill and more development and more coordination, athleticism, skill, you know, and we don't really see that. We see kids moving around a lot, which is a separate issue, but we also see we win at all costs. So hopefully those listening, if you are from an association, you know, really instill development and you people that are on boards at associations do not over-incentivize results at a young level. Like if you're developing 2 or 3 great players every year, but you're in the middle of the pack, I would take that over winning a championship and never developing anyone. So food for thought. Last one, Craig, fire away.
Thanks, Bogues. Great to hear about Aaron Baines in that article a couple of weeks ago. So really happy to hear that he's on the mend.
Really good.
I just wanted to get your thoughts on actually defining what an MVP is. Seems to be the perception what an MVP is these days. It's about, obviously, you know, putting up points and everything. And we've sort of gone away from actually being the most valuable player to the team. So I wanted to get both your thoughts on that and whether the Suns and Chris Paul maybe he's getting overlooked with that.
Yeah, I think maybe Chris Paul is a little bit because they are pretty pretty well stacked team, but let's not forget they weren't that team without him. So he's done a really good job of just instilling, winning habits there and keeping them accountable and professional and all that kind of stuff. So I think an MVP for me is if you take that player away from that team, what do they look like? And that's why I really think Jokic is the MVP this year, because I don't think Denver, I don't even know if they're a playing team without him this season, Pro. I really don't. I think they're towards the bottom of the West. The games that they're competing in off his own bat, let's not forget, no Murray, no Porter Jr. Take Jokic away from that roster right now, they're down there with Portland, in my opinion. They're down there somewhere. Maybe scratched and competing with the Lakers for 8, 9, 10. So I look at removing that player. Now there are people that do get screwed. Chris Paul's one of them, because people say, he's got Booker, he's got Aiden, he's got a lot of good players that he can have a bad game or two and still win. But yeah, you take that player away. The year we went really well with Steph Curry, we won the championship. You take him away from that roster, we're probably a playoff team, but maybe we're in there somewhere, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But he jumped us 6, 7 spots, and that's what I look at. Do you make other players better around you? So with MVPs, I think if these kind of role players that develop into really good players over the course of your years with that team, and they get swamped by other teams and paid big contracts, that's a sign of MVP, because you're making, and a lot of times those guys get paid and go to another team and they don't live up to the expectations. That's the sign of an MVP, because you played with this great that has got you paid, and you go to another team, they're expecting the same thing, but they don't have that MVP next to you. You struggle a little bit, but that's a sign of an MVP. He makes everyone better. So I think that's what I look at, removing from the team. What does the team look like? I think Denver, for me, you could argue Philly as well with Embiid, but with Harden there now, I think they'd still be in the mix for a playoff spot. But that's what I look at, Pro.
Yeah, Bogues, I agree. I agree with every word of that. I think that like what does a team look like is definitely worthwhile. As far as how many more wins do you think you're worth? The first idea that I got ever when I analyzed some trade stuff when I was in Boston, and in the front office, and I evaluated guys like Larry Bird, who upped his team, as a rookie with basically the same roster. I think he improved the team by 22 wins. The Jason Kidd trade for Stephon Marbury, when they basically swapped rosters back, in the early 2000s. And, New Jersey was struggling with Marbury. Phoenix was doing really well with Jason Kidd. They flip-flop, and, I think New Jersey was in 3 straight finals starting the next year.
Yeah.
That same year they made the trade. So, I think that, can you upgrade the winning? Look at LeBron James. You could say whatever you want about LeBron James. Imagine he took those awful Cleveland teams to NBA finals. Now you could say the East was bad or whatever, but when you could carry a team on their back, Allen Iverson, what he did for Philly that year they made the championship with a bunch of role players, if that, and that weren't, they got overpaid, just like you said. He took care of them because of the fact that they made a finals. And I think that really signifies to me what an MVP is. You're right. Because I don't really know, you could say, stats, media, I don't know. But I do think that if I was in a tunnel and if I was in a vacuum and I'm looking at it, I'm looking exactly what you said. What do you mean to the team? Do you elevate winning? Do you make that job so much easier for the players around you? And I think that's sort of what I would look at as an MVP for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a balance. And look, there are some players that just strictly are playing for numbers and strictly playing for the MVP by getting mass numbers. And I'd take a lesser number guy that's impacting the game more, rather than sometimes there's guys that inflate their numbers. You're studying them. They won't give up the pass unless they know someone's going to shoot it to get the assist. Now, Chris Paul was notorious for that. I think he's gotten much better. Yeah, Westbrook too, but Chris Paul's gotten much better at it, because I heard stories at New Orleans where he'd throw it to Pager, and Pager didn't shoot it, he'd cuss him out, and he's like, I was half contested. He's like, get it up. If I get it to you, get it up. And because he wanted the assist, right? And that plays a part as well. So, yeah, I think it's a good mix. But yeah, sometimes the numbers can be deceiving, like a Westbrook, and sometimes there's guys that they're not 30 and 10 a night, but they might be 25 and 8, but they have a bigger impact. And defensively, there's a lot they can do defensively. Are they a good teammate in the locker room? Plays a part as well. Are they do they relay what their coach is saying, or are they just strictly out there to get numbers? And some of that stuff fans would never have any idea about because they're not in the trenches, and only the people in the locker room will know about it. But that will wrap up today's session. Appreciate everyone joining us. Decent turnout, and we'll see you all next week.